Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Shirk. I'm with the Alliance for Peacebuilding and our digital peacebuilding community of practice. Today, we have two panelists or two presenters who will be telling us about their work. May I ask everyone to mute themselves, or Nick, can you make sure everyone's muted? So let me introduce Helena Puig-Lorari and Daniel Burkhart-Surigo. Helena is governance and peacebuilding professional with over a decade of experience advising and supporting UN agencies, multilateral organizations, and NGOs working in conflict contexts and polarized environments. As one of the founders of Build Up, she focuses on the integration of digital technology and innovation in peace processes and on the analysis of digital conflict drivers. She has written and spoken extensively on this subject matter. She holds a BA in politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford University and a master's in public policy from Princeton University. She's a board member of Public Sentiment and Digital Peace Now, as well as an Ashoka Fellow. And Daniel is a founding data scientist at Data Value People. So this is a tech and peacebuilding partnership. And so it's one of the few examples of this in the world, and we're really excited to have them here today. He was a physics and philosophy major at Oxford University. He's consulted for the UK Government Office of Rail and Road. He's been the chairperson of nonprofit organizations. He's published academically and built reinforcement learning pricing optimization algorithms operating on millions of pounds of revenue. So that's just a little bit about our two speakers today. I want to point out before we begin that this session is recorded so that we can put it on the website later. And we invite everyone to introduce yourselves in the chat so that we can know who's here today and where you're coming from. This digital peacebuilding community of practice, we meet every month on the third Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so Nick Zorowski, who is our Alliance for Peacebuilding staff person for this community of practice, will put those links into the chat. If you'd like to be notified every month of what event we're hosting, you can be on our listserv. And with that, I turn it over to you, Helena and Daniel.
Thanks very much, Lisa, for the introductions, and thank you for having us here today. We're really excited to be presenting about this piece of work that we've been doing together as a collaboration between Build Up and Data Value People. I'm just getting my slides going, so hopefully everybody can see this now. And so we're going to be talking about Phoenix, the social media listening by and for peace builders and mediators that we've been working on together. We've got quite a few slides because we wanted to give you a lot of information about what we're doing. We're quite excited. And then I'm hoping, Lisa, I believe there's time for questions at the end. I don't know how you do those, if you moderate or put them in the chat, but keep them in mind because we're looking forward to them.
Yes.
Cool. So I wanted to just open with this quote that maybe some of you have seen by an organization called Data for Black Lives. And it's a quote that really talks about what it is that we should be thinking about as big data becomes more of a presence in a lot of the work that we do in different fields, including in the peacebuilding field. And I think that the sort of the sentiment behind this quote, which I hope you're reading while I'm talking, I'm not going to read it out, is really at the heart of why we started to think about how we could work with social media data as peace builders. The beginning of Phoenix, of this tool and process that we've now built together with Data Value People, came very much from practical work. We started doing work on social media listening. We started worrying about what was happening on social media, but also about how social media data was being interpreted by either companies or organizations that didn't necessarily know peace building or conflict transformation. And so we started building, very scrappy bits of code and scraping things and putting them in databases and slowly realizing that what was needed was a standardized tool and process that we could use across different programs. So that it's how we came up with Phoenix. And Phoenix is an open source and non-commercial and customizable process and tool to support peace builders and mediators who want to work ethically with social media data to inform programming. That's our one-liner about what we're doing together. The whole process of designing and building this and now of iterating it, which we'll be talking about, has been a collaboration between Build Up and Data Valley people. So what is this Phoenix process that we're talking about? And it really is easier to think about it as a process rather than just a tool, because I think if we speak of it as a tool, it's a little bit reductionist. So it basically has 5 components, and we're going to talk about each of these so to give you a bit of an overview. It starts off with a set of contextually grounded problem statements that address some kind of a peace building objective. And then based on that problem statement, we build a data pipeline that adds different social media sources and other data sources that you might need to address this problem statement. We then build customizable automatic labeling models to reduce the manual organizing of data so that basically we can interpret large amounts of data coming from social media. And then once that data is labeled, we create a dashboard to visualize a number of different trends that we think are particularly useful to peace builders around engagement, sentiment, and networks of actors and topics. And then based on the analysis that we can conduct using these visualizations, we build evidence-based initiatives that respond to social media insights. So it sounds very simple when you put it like that in those 5 steps, but it's actually not so easy to go through each one of them. So I want to just talk briefly about what we mean by problem statements. I think, you know, when people first approach the area of social media listening in any field, but I've seen it a lot with peace builders, they say, you know, can we just look at what social media has to say? And that's too broad of a question, too broad of a research question to be asking. So because we've been working on trying to look at different conflict dynamics on social media and doing research on social media listening that can support peace building programming, we've sort of come up with 2 frameworks to try and think through why you might want to listen to social media if you're working as a peace builder. The first one is kind of a framework to understand why you might be listening to social media. And we think of this as the digital conflict drivers. I feel like in this particular community of practice, I don't need to explain this. I don't need to belabor this. I can provide resources for these frameworks if you're interested. But essentially, this framework to understanding why you should listen to social media in peace building talks about the different ways that the way that social media is structured can create polarization, create further divisions, further group identities, etc., and how that connects to conflict drivers. That's the first framework we use. And then the second framework is to understand how that might happen. And so we've developed this idea of the archetypes of polarization. So when we talk about polarization, what are we talking about? We're not talking about a difference of opinion. We're talking about effective polarization, about the kind of polarization that drives people apart. And that shows up in different archetypical ways and has certain signals on social media that we try to categorize. So using these 2 tools, we sort of build problem statements that narrow down what it is we're listening for. So what is it we're interested in? We're interested in understanding how young Yemenis express their identity on Facebook and Twitter, because that intersects with the conflict dynamics in Yemen, for example. So it kind of narrows down what we're listening for. And the problem statements, in the work we've done with Phoenix so far have always been collaboratively developed using different participatory action research methods with people we've been working with.
Great. I'm going to take over for a bit, talk about some of the more technical details. So we're going to be kind of covering we're moving towards the overall data pipeline, the actual procedural part of Phoenix. And like Helena said, we're focusing on a problem statement, and we're trying to investigate this system of interest, these social media platforms, to try to get an answer or a handle or some kind of reading on that problem statement. So these data sources are the bits of that system that we are measuring. So you could think of it, akin to looking at the where people live in a city, for instance, for the types of plants in an ecosystem. We're doing the same thing for social media platforms. So these are the bits we're measuring. So some stuff from Facebook, from Instagram. We actually use the CrowdTangle API, which is a service from Facebook. And Twitter, we use that API directly, and YouTube, they also have an API. So we're pulling all this stuff like directly from the companies. Yeah, we can go next, Helena. Thanks. And this is a pictorial representation of the main data pipeline. So behind this, you can think of a load of lines of code, Python code, that is actually programmatically doing this. So we're pulling all the raw data down from the social media sites, we're processing them, standardizing them, organizing them into databases, and then hopefully that's the simple part. And then the higher up parts is where stuff gets more interesting, and we're going to be talking about this in the next few slides. But you see we have this manual labeling block and this inference classify block, and then finally the dashboard. So the dashboard is a bit the end users actually see. So the peace building organizations that we work with, they interact with the dashboard. They use that dashboard to try to answer those research questions that they're interested in, so that they can better understand the problem, to address the problems they're trying to tackle. And the inference and manual labeling, these are kind of where a lot of the special stuff happens, the interesting stuff happens. So we'll be talking about this next, I believe. So we can go to the next. Cool. So back to our analogy of, say, you're trying to study a city, and you might have a record of where everybody lives or where businesses are placed throughout that city, or even very, very fine-grained details about that city, but you don't want to interact with that information at that fine level. You want to be able to look at higher order, higher level measurements and inferences about that system. So you could go through and read every single post if you had unlimited time on your hands, but we don't. And so we want to be able to pull out meaningful information about how that system, how the dynamics of that system are working, and how what the drivers of the particular dynamics we're seeing that are relevant to our research questions. And we want to be able to pull that out of the information in an efficient way, because we don't have unlimited time, and we want to be able to do this in a powerful way. So we have this. What we do is we take practically, we take the posts that we're crawling, so tweets and Facebook posts and comments, and we build classifiers for them. So a taxonomy. So this post is about identity, or this post is about gender, or this post is about a particular region or event relevant to the research question. And we've kind of been developing this strong competency internally with Phoenix, which is quite a challenge, which is not that we don't have these classification models pre-built, because we don't know what the participants are going to be interested in until we're there with them, working with them, and talking about their research questions. So we need to be able to build those machine learning classifier models, these things which take a post and output a topic. So it might be put the post in the machine learning algorithm, and it gives out identity. Put the next post in and it gives out gender, for instance. But we need to be able to build those quickly and efficiently for a set of topics, a set of classifications that are highly relevant to the research question that our participants want to answer. So, and we have a system for doing that, where we get them to label a small amount of data, and then we build a first iteration of a machine learning model classifier, and they label some more data. And we're kind of developing this competency internally. So, but it's a big part of what makes the system powerful. And again, there's one, we want it to be specific to the peace builders. Two, it needs to work in the places and languages where those peace builders are based, and that can also be a challenge. So there's, again, a lot of the development in terms of natural language processing, which is a term for data science and machine learning on text data, is very Western based. So we might be working with Kurdish peace builders, and we need to have processing specifically for Kurdish, and that can often be a challenge, and we work with developers in those areas to help that. So cool. Let's go with that.
Jan, do you want to just talk a little bit more about kind of this piece, the manual labeling, and then the classification, and then back to the manual labeling and back to the classification, just so people understand, like when we say customizable, like how does that work when we're working with a group of peace builders?
Yeah, so if we have a particular group of peace builders who are looking at the interaction between younger generations and older generations in their community, and they see that there's a high level of tension, or there isn't a lot of productive communication between those groups in their communities. So one classification we might want to infer for all of the posts in an automatic way is this post about youth? Is it youth related, or is it older generation related? And having knowing all the posts and seeing the number of posts about each coming from which pages or where in the system is going to be valuable for answering those questions. So the actual process we'd go through is we would take a sample of the data, and we would ask those piece builders to, say, label 1,000 posts, or just spend 2 hours doing it. Do as many as you can in 2 hours, and they would say, yeah, this is about youth, yeah, this is about older generations, or yeah, this is irrelevant. And they would go through that process, and then we would take that small initial labeled data set, so the posts with the labels that they've manually put those labels on, that's the manual labeling part, and we would build a classifier from that. So we would train a machine learning model to try to detect whether a post is about youth or older generation or neither in an automatic fashion. And there's a whole load we talk about actually how that works, but for now you could just think of it as we're just trying to find a mapping or some mathematical function which takes a Facebook post and spits out 1 for youth, 2 for older generation, or 3 for irrelevant, as an idea. And again, that first version is gonna work to some extent. It's never going to be perfect. No machine learning model is going to give you 100% accuracy. So we're going to have that as the first version, and then we're going to make some predictions on the data that hasn't yet been labeled, and then we're going to give that back to the piece builders to label some more data, and they can get a sense of how accurate the machine learning model is. And that loop we can kind of go through as many times as we need to, in a sense. And every time we're going through it, we're improving the model. And yeah, there's some more technical details we could talk about how to do that more efficiently. So, but I won't get into that now because it's probably a bit technical. But that loop about we get manually labeled data, we build a classifier, we make some predictions on it on the posts, and then we feed that back into the piece builders, get feedback, and improve the model. That's that loop in the middle that you can kind of see. There isn't a backwards arrow, but in between organized
backwards arrow.
Yeah, we need the both.
I think the reason I wanted to get Daniel to say that again is that I really want to be clear that this is what we mean about developing the competency to build models, as opposed to building standardized models, which we're not doing. And we're not doing that because we don't think standardized models are that particularly useful with the kind of work that we all do. And also, I wanted Dan to explain it because I think that people often talk about artificial intelligence when actually they just mean machine learning, and actually what all that is humans feeding a machine a set of data, and then that machine trying to replicate the same patterns. And so I just think it's quite important to kind of try and break that down. Did I just not do?
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah. I think a few more salient points are just to clarify, when we talk about models that are already built, say standardized models, you can, on the internet, you can download a machine learning model, which you can give it an image, and it will tell you whether it's a cat or a dog, for instance. And you can also take a machine learning model and give it some text, and it will try to tell you the topic that text is about. Right. But the ones that are already developed out there, kind of already developed, we're saying aren't going to be relevant. They're not useful for answering the questions for the specific piece builders that we're working with, because this hasn't been done before. And it's not a standardized thing. So we're not trying to build models that other people can use. We're trying to be able to build models specifically for piece builders as they need them, when they need them, in an efficient, effective way. Yeah.
And as they connect to the problem statements, right? Which is why that's where we start, the problem statements. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of automatic classifications we've and inference we've done right now. So we're now we're going to start talking about Phoenix Alpha, which is what is working right now. And then I'm going to briefly talk about Phoenix Beta, which is what we're working towards. So right now, in the current version of Phoenix, the unit of analysis is any text that is posted. What that means is that each post and each comment, so each post on Facebook, each comment on Facebook, each YouTube video, each YouTube comment is treated, and each tweet or each retweet is treated as a discrete piece of information. This will be important in 1 minute, but just keep it in mind for now. So it's each treated as a discrete piece of information, and each one of those pieces of information is classified. And right now we have 3 kinds of classifications. One is basically a classification that is based on the text that is in that post or comment. And that will typically classify things into whether this is relevant or irrelevant. So one problem that a lot of people have is they get a lot of junk, basically, when they're, scraping, like a lot of stuff about, I don't know, MTV. We always get loads of stuff about MTV. And you need to kind of like make sure you're not considering that in your analysis. So one thing that we can do is just say, is this relevant or not, based on one trained model. The second thing is what topic is it? But here again, it's topics that are relevant to the problem statement. We've done some classifications of hate speech, some classifications of type of conflict as well. So it's those kind of things that are based on the text that is being posted. Secondly, we also label by actor or affiliation based on a pre-identified list. So this isn't for all of the data. It's for, okay, we're actually, these 200 actors we're particularly interested in making sure that they're labeled. And so we'll develop that list, and then that will get populated across the database.
And then when we're talking about actors, examples of actors might be particular Twitter accounts or particular Facebook pages. And we're saying, okay, we're going to crawl all of the posts from that page and all of the tweets from these Twitter accounts. And then we're going to manually label those accounts as this is a journalist, this is a political party, or etc. Yeah.
And then we're going to populate every single post, right? So that label is applied to every single post that we collect. And then finally, in this first version, we've also integrated existing language sentiment models. So this was possible both because we were working in a fairly common language, which is Arabic, in the work that we were doing, and models have been developed for that. But, to be totally honest, we don't think this is massively helpful, which we already suspected, but it was the best we had for now. So we've been using an existing language sentiment model that just classifies text as positive, negative, or neutral. I'm sure many of you have seen standard social media listening tools have seen these models. So that's what we have right now. But one of the things that's been really interesting is that we've been working together to think about, okay, what could we improve given all of the analysis that we've now done with Phoenix Alpha. And we're basically we're working on making two important changes. The first one is to change the unit of analysis. And I think this is actually probably the most important thing. So because what we're trying to do is understand the structure of exchanges or conversations on social media, so that we can understand how polarization dynamics are taking place on social media, we realized that what we need to really understand, and what we were piecing together, not manually, but kind of by inferring certain things on Phoenix Alpha, is how posts and comments, or how videos and comments, or how tweets and replies, so threads basically, are working. So what is happening in those threads? So we're in the next version of Phoenix, we're going to be using threads as the unit of analysis. And I actually think that will be much more interesting in terms of the kind of analysis that we need to do as peace builders, because it's often in threads that you see polarization, not in discrete posts or discrete comments. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is we're going to be slightly changing the classifications that we work towards. The first two are kind of a little bit similar to what we mentioned. So the first one, the author, is what I earlier called the actor. So this is who is posting, and we'll be classifying by profession, and that will be based on a list of authors that we have. The second author classification, which is what I'm calling behavior on social media, will be inferred from a score that comes from the last bullet point, behaviors. And I'll come to that in 1 second, so just bear with me. The second classification is the topics classification, very similar to what I already mentioned that we already have. This will just be a kind of a refreshed or improved version of that, but it'll be the same kind of thing. The third one is we noticed that we're often interested in finding out whether certain actors, and I am going to call it actors, are mentioned in a piece of text. And so it's possible to basically infer entities, organizations, proper nouns, identity groups from text, and so label whether this is about that actor as opposed to authored by this actor. And then the last one, and this is I think the one that we're most excited about, is that we've been kind of tinkering and playing around and are now hoping to build a model that classifies threads according to these archetypes of polarization that I mentioned earlier. So this would basically indicate whether in this thread we are seeing one of 5 archetypes of polarization that we've identified through our ongoing research. And these archetypes are norms and interests and behaviors. There's a few different ones. And so that would be one classification. But on the other side, we also want to see whether any threads have evident signals of effective depolarization. So bridging behavior essentially happening in these threads. And then finally, we want to classify whether there's political polarization. And by political polarization, we literally mean, is this pro or anti something? And this is quite important. For example, we did a piece of research a while ago on Libya, and knowing whether a particular thread was pro or anti certain things was very important to the analysis. So that's kind of what we're working towards. And, you know, we don't have anything to show for that, except for we've been thinking about this and we're pretty excited to build it. And we think it's going to make Phoenix even more powerful. But we're going to go back now to Phoenix Alpha. So what we already have. And Dan, do you want to talk a bit about the dashboard?
Totally. Yeah, just to give everybody a sense of what the end result actually looks like for the piece builders trying to conduct their analysis. We'll just run through a few screenshots of the dashboard. And they have some bits that are blurred out for data privacy and reasons. So yeah, cool. Let's go for it. So part 1, this is looking at topics. Again, these are the results of the classification process that we were talking about in depth earlier. So it's going to be maybe a bit tricky for you to read, but we're looking at lots of counts generally. So lots of just information on numbers of counts. So stuff about what are the most popular Facebook pages given the relevant data. So we've already gone through the process of calling the data, processing it, classifying it, and we've already dropped out anything which is junk, right? Anything about MTV is no longer in there. And then so we can look at, okay, given the stuff that we're interested in, these pages are posting the most relevant topics to that. And then on the bottom, those histograms on the bottom row, they're looking at the counts per actual topic. So it might be the volume of Facebook posts by topic. That first one, there might be around 50K, they're about identity, or the next 30K, they're about gender, for instance. And if your screen's big enough, you might be able to read some of those. And again, this is getting a handle for how much of the discussion is about certain topics in this part of the system that we've called.
And I just want to say one thing that we're not showing here, because we're just showing a screenshot, is that this has a filter. So I can also see, I can filter basically by what are the topics. If I just have positive sentiment, I can also say, can you just show me one topic and then show me what the top Facebook pages are, etc. And there's a bit more in this section of the dashboard that allows you to look at tables of some of the top posts and just get a very quick snapshot of what are the main things that are coming out. So the top posts across all of these.
Yeah, so that in the top, if you look at the top bar, there's kind of these tabs, and below that there's a bar that says controls. So they're all the ways you can slice and dice the underlying data that then is the visuals update based on what you've done to filter the underlying data there. Cool. And this was the sentiment. So these are the results of the sentiment we discussed earlier, and also the sentiment kind of cross-combined with the topic. So it's looking at, okay, for a given topic, say we're talking about identity, how much of the posts that we've labeled identity are positive, negative, or neutral sentiment. And again, the same controls apply. Yeah, cool. And these are actually kind of an idea that we had earlier on, and they turned out to be really valuable for the piece builders for getting getting an efficient understanding of kind of what's actually being talked about. Again, the problem is there's so much content, there's so much information that we're getting about a system. How does a human process that? So we're trying to kind of bubble up to the surface the important things, the higher inference, the higher understanding of that system in an efficient way. So these are word clouds which have been grouped using a data-driven algorithm. So So basically clustering, take all the posts and cluster them based on the words they're using, and then look at the word clouds in those clusters. And a lot of the participants found these really valuable. And again, you can see it's in Arabic. So
and I think if you've used word clouds, but like word clouds before, one thing is that like you'll get like these word clouds that just show you like the main things that you already know are in the text. What was really interesting about this is, can you see how it says hate speech word cloud groupings? So basically these are the word clouds, the different word clouds within the topic of hate speech. So it actually allows you to look a bit further than what kind of like, you know, just a word cloud of all the text would just be, you know, almost, it cannot be interpreted. It's just very hard to understand what you're seeing there. Where here we were actually seeing a bit more.
I wonder if also we shouldn't be calling them word clouds, and we should actually be calling them like, you know, clusters, because there's no clouds actually. They're just the word. They're like the counts of the words after we've used this quite sophisticated NLP algorithm to do kind of close in space clustering. If that makes sense.
Okay, so if you have something that isn't word cloud but isn't the output of an NLP space clustering, if you have a better name for that, then put it in the chat and we'll correct you.
Even better, a latent dirichlet allocation, I believe LDA is what it stands for. If that means anything to anybody in the audience, congratulations. Yeah.
So if you have a better name for these, let us know.
Yeah,
okay,
cool.
One more thing.
And then, network graphs. So these networks are a common way of visualizing social media analysis data and generally stuff to do with humans. They're often readily visualized as networks. So this is I'm guessing it will be something from Twitter?
No,
or maybe Facebook.
YouTube commenters.
Okay, cool, nice. And what we've done is nodes are here, the dots are there'll be pages or accounts, and then they'll be users, and the links will be when they're commenting on the same videos. And so we can see where then the colors are clustering that we've done on that network graph. So we use standards. There's a whole host of tools and machinery and mathematical algorithms for analyzing networks. So once you have your system in a network structure, you can put those upon that. And one of them is clustering. So you look at how the connections are made and you try to identify separate clusters, and the colors represent that on this graph. And you can start to pull out meaningful, higher level understanding of what's going on. So the annotations we've put on afterwards, of course. The actual just raw network graph is the dots and the lines. And this was a really interesting one about trying to find out what do older and younger generations both talk about. Where's their intersection point? What's the interests or the topics or the parts of the network where they actually overlap? And football was one that came out in a big way there.
Yeah, and also to give credit where credit goes. I mean, this was actually an analyst from the British Council who was doing this using Phoenix. And I think the reason I want to say that also is because I think it's really, it gets really interesting when you have someone who has a lot of contextual knowledge, as he did, looking at this graph and then, putting these labels on top and basically saying, actually, this is what I'm seeing. And so I think hopefully that, it's starting to point those of you who work in this kind of, who do this kind of work, the digital peace building work, to where this would actually be really useful to inform programming, right? You start to see some of the insights that can come out of this kind of analysis.
Yeah, and just to double check, it's the stuff you're seeing here. It's like, I don't do this analysis. I'm the person behind who's trying to build the tools that then the actual and the people who actually have some knowledge about the stuff going on, because I don't know anything about most stuff that we've worked with, right? I don't have any of that experience. So this is all for usage by the actual peace builders in their communities, in their countries, trying to make a difference there. Yeah.
So that's the dashboard. So hopefully if you're with us, we start with a problem statement, which might be, okay, I'm interested in understanding how younger and older people are, or tensions between younger and older people are showing up on social media. It might be, I want to understand how young Yemeni people are expressing their identity online and how that's playing into conflict divides. It might be, I want to understand how hatred about ethnic and religious minorities is being expressed on social media in Iraq and how that's contributing to offline tensions. These are all problem statements. And then we have these data sources that we agree we're going to scrape from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. And then they get labeled in these various ways that we've described, and then they get visualized in this dashboard. All of this, in our view, is pointing towards designing initiatives that address what comes out of these analytical insights. And so I just want to say, one of the reasons we don't have specific analytical insights in here is because none of the work that we've done is fully public. So we don't want to say, and we found this. We did show you one graph that might give you an idea of the kind of things that we're seeing. But I think generally speaking, the kind of things that we're seeing are things like, when we're talking about ethnic tensions, actually what really matters is the way that people are politicizing religion by using these terms and speaking about these topics on these pages to change the conversation. And so if an intervention is going to be done, it has to be done here, addressing these issues. So it's that kind of insight that we're getting out of the platform. And so one thing that we've been doing is basically working with organizations that are using Phoenix to then translate these insights into a design of initiatives. And the kinds of skills that we're trying to bring in, because we think they're relevant to a lot of what's coming out of the analysis, are things like methods to bridge divides and rehumanize relationships online, how nonviolent communication can be adapted to social media, but also just more generally kind of how to use strategic communication tools, defining audiences, targeting to those audiences, etc., to run a more effective social media campaign. So it's that combination of kind of communications and peace building methodologies to address what's coming out of the analysis. That is the final piece of the Phoenix process as we're seeing it. So we just wanted to end by telling you a little bit about what we've done so far and kind of what comes next. So what we've done so far is we've deployed the platform to 8 countries. And I think last time we checked, we'd scraped about 2 million bits of social media data, although it's probably more by now. The platform is currently optimized for Arabic, but is also processing Kurdish. We've collaborated with a number of academic institutions and researchers to make this possible. And it's currently serving UN agencies and local peace builders. So that's where we're at. And we also just want to spell out, there's a lot of limitations, but these 3 I think are really important. The first one is something that Dan said earlier, which is that the perfect classifier is not possible, by which we mean that some of the automated classification is going to be wrong. Some things are going to be mislabeled. But in the aggregate and in general, it's going to be good enough to draw insights. And that's why automation is still important, because we won't be able to work with as much data otherwise. The second point is that if you were paying attention when we said that we select data sources, you will have picked up that we're not looking at all of social media, amongst other things, because that would be impossible. So, how much of the data are we looking at? Maybe we're looking at 2% of the data. Because what we're trying to do is focus in on a small but important subset of data. 2% of the data is still a lot of data. I just want to say that in case you're thinking that's not much. It's actually quite a lot. And then the last point is that the Phoenix, the tool, the process, isn't going to do things for you. It's more like you will do things with it. So I say that because I think often we sort of get asked, can it just do the analysis for us? And it's like, well, it's not like that. It's much better to think of it as a process, and that's why we try to describe it in that way, as opposed to as a tool.
Yeah, maybe just on going back on those. So on the perfect classifier, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking at trying to get the meaningful, substantial signals. The dynamics that are persistent through the system that we care about. That's the bits we want. And even if we have a bit of noise in there, those dynamics will still be apparent. Even if you have a bit of fuzziness in your picture of a dog, you can still tell it's a dog, for instance. And then on the tool doing things with you, I like to think of it as almost like a telescope. It's not going to it's not going to find the stars for you, but it can help you look at certain bits of the night sky, and then you can investigate into those and understand what's going on in that particular part with some effort with that tool.
Yeah, and so I don't know if this question is coming up for people, but we thought we'd get ahead of the game and try and answer it, which is, maybe some of you are using CrowdTangle, or you're using Talkwalker, or you're using, one of the millions of commercial tools that are out there to do social media listening, and you're wondering, why is this Phoenix process any different? So we've got 3 reasons why we think it's different and worth using. The first one is that it's open source and it's non-commercial. So if you have the technical team in-house, you can set it up. It's on GitHub. Or if you want us to set it up, as in the Build Up Data Value People partnership, we'll charge you for what it costs. We don't want to make a profit, and we hope to hand it over to you and minimize the cost as much as possible. And we're constantly trying to reduce the cost of deploying it. The second one, and for me, this is the most important one, is that the methods are customizable. So everything, the problem statements you decide, the data pipeline is fed by what you decide, the labeling models and dashboards are all meant to fit your peace building needs. And that's what we want to do. And that's what we're interested in, really, is building something that is useful for people. And then the last thing is that it's made by and for peace builders. So we really think that because it's come out of a need at Build Up and working with lots of different people, that it's optimized for analysis needs to inform peace building programming. And because we've been doing that for a while, we can incorporate what we've learned, but also we want to learn from you. And that's kind of the point also of this session, of this webinar. And we kind of we met up a few weeks ago to kind of think about what our vision was for Phoenix, because we've been so busy kind of building the alpha version that we hadn't stopped. And we realized that this is kind of what is driving us, that we want to create accessible tools for peace builders around the world to be able to do social media analysis, and through that to contribute to decolonizing data. That we want to create software and AI systems that can provide new insights into polarization on digital media, including on social media. And that we want to create a community of developers and peace builders that can sustain the longevity of this process, and demonstrate the possibility for future collaborations like the one we have between Build Up and Data Value People. So yeah, what we're doing next, we're going to keep working with UNDP Lebanon, with the civil society organizations we've been working with. We've just started working with Search for Common Ground as well, and we're building Phoenix Beta, which we're quite excited about. And if you want to know more or get in touch with us, then these are our contact details. And hopefully we didn't speak too long and there's still time for questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, both of you, Helena and Daniel. This was absolutely fantastic. I know a question I have, and someone also in the chat asked, how can we learn more? Can you offer us a day-long or 2-day training on how to use this tool? Because I have a feeling there are a lot of people who will want to understand a bit more, so that we need a bit more training in order to use it. But before you answer that, let me go to a more technical question, and that is, how do you define hate speech? And then another question in the text in the chat was, how do you disentangle or disaggregate, a gender versus a religious piece of hate speech?
Sure, yeah, I can have a go at these. So the first one, which was a post that corresponds to more than one category, that's just allowed. It's like a multi-class classification. So if you have a post that's about gender and religion, then it can get both classifications. So that hopefully answers that one. Hate speech. So how are hate speech terms defined? So we're not trying to define which terms count as hate speech. It's up to, again, this is part of why it's so specific to those peace builders, is that if those peace builders are looking at a certain kind of hate speech, it's up to them to label the posts that they want to be tagged, they want to be classified as hate speech in their research. And if there's certain terms that appear frequently in what they're labeling, then the model will start to identify and associate those terms with the hate speech they want for their particular classification. But in general, we're not trying to make like a a universal classifier for hate speech. Is that right, Helena?
Yeah, and I want to now like say it in a, I'm going to say what you said, but say it in different words to see if this lands for other people, which is that I think a lot of people here are very familiar with hate speech lexicons, right? So you kind of go off and you like come up and you say, these are the hate speech terms and phrases that are most relevant to social media in the Democratic Republic of Congo or in Ethiopia, and etc. Peace Tech Lab has done an excellent piece of work at defining these hate speech lexicons. And those are useful and can be a starting point. However, the way that this is different is that we wouldn't develop a lexicon. What we would do is we would feed you, whoever we're working with a bunch of data. And we would say, every time a post is hate speech, just say hate speech. Don't tell us why. Don't say it's because of this word or it's because of this phrase. Just say hate speech, okay? And then keep going. And we'll feed that to the model. And the model will decide how to disentangle from your labels and the text that it's seeing what the pattern is, and therefore where hate speech is. And then we will send you back what the model has said, and it will get it wrong 50% of the time. And then you'll go back and you'll say, no, it got it wrong here, and it got it wrong here, and it got it wrong here, but this is hate speech and this is hate speech. And then it will feed it back to the model, and then it'll keep going. So the reason I'm interested in this is because, as many of you know, lexicons are actually, they're really difficult. Because so much of it is contextual. And so what machine learning allows us to do is to rely on the machine being able to pick up more than we can in a lexicon. I think that's my summary. Was that okay, Dan?
100%. Yeah, that's perfect. So you can imagine the lexicon as being actually us, the humans, are trying to build the classifier model. That's what you're doing with a lexicon. You're saying, hey, I'm going to write a big mathematical function, and the function is, if you ever see these words or these combinations of words, say this is hate speech. That's equivalent to what a machine learning model does. It's a set of rules. It can take an input, some text. You put the rules on it. Does that text contain something from a lexicon? Label it as say that it's hate speech. So what we're doing is we're not trying to actually curate those rules ourselves. We label some examples and we let some statistical models and mathematical models and machine learning and AI, if you really want to call it that, but generally we don't call it that, to try to create those rules that are accurate on the training data we've given it. And then we use that model to go beyond that training data. So that's the process. Yeah. If anybody wants any more questions on that particular point, I guess feel free to jump in.
There's a few others in the chat here, so let me just highlight them.
I can keep going down too. So what is the scale or number of data points that you need to work with before it makes sense to use these tools? So this tool gets the data as well as is the tool for analyzing the data. So generally we're in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tweets and comments and posts from Facebook. And again, we can vary how much data we want to get. It costs more the more data you get generally for computation. There's a question from Erica about
maybe Dan, let Lisa moderate the question.
Sorry.
I have an idea of what
apologies.
Like all of the, she's been reading them while we were talking.
I'm trying to combine them as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, go for it. My apologies.
That's fine. They're asking for the GitHub link that you provided. And if you can then address the issue of whether you're already offering longer trainings on how to use this, or really how can one of the audience members contact you if they want more?
I think the answer is email us. We can put our emails in the chat now, as well as it was on the slide, because it doesn't actually, like right now, I just want to be really clear about this. Phoenix isn't a tool like Gmail. Like you can't create an account and start using it. Either you have someone technical who can take the code from GitHub and start your own instance, or you need us to set it up. We are not at the point where we can just like say, why don't you just log in and play around? That's just not going to happen for a very long time, not even with beta. Okay. So the answer is email us and we can talk about whether, this is something that would be interesting for you. That's why we're not offering longer trainings, because there's no point unless we're setting up an instance for you. So it's more like email us, tell us what you need, tell us what resources you have technically in-house, and we will be really happy to work something out, because we would like to get this to as many people as possible. Does that explain the training question?
Yes, I think that's great. Another question is, do you have a monitoring and evaluation to figure out how much you're getting right, or sort of looking at how to improve the tool or how effective it is?
Dan, do you want to talk about, I assume this means the labeling. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Does it mean the labeling or in general?
I assume the question refers to like how whether we're getting the.
I mean, in terms of the labeling, the answer is quite easy because we get
if we're getting it right. Oh no, sorry, that I misinterpreted that question. I think it's more like whether people are, whether Phoenix is doing what organizations want. And I think, I mean, to be honest, Erica, we're not at that point. Like we've used it with 18 organizations. We got a ton of feedback from them, and we're also using it ourselves. And so that's where the next iteration has come from all of those conversations. And I think next time that we put out a version and more people are using it, we will continue to receive feedback. So we don't have a sort of an evaluation process in place in a robust way, that in the way that you're describing.
All right, great. Someone's asking if you can show the slide about next steps again. And while one of you is pulling that up, the question is, does Phoenix gauge the positivity, negativity of posts, especially in Arabic?
Yeah, so we use a sentiment classifier model to do positive, negative, neutral sentiment, and that works in Arabic. We didn't build that model. There was just quite a few models out there to do that. We're not super sure on how useful sentiment in that particular sense is in research. So again, we're using it because it's not that hard to do, because the research already been done. The model's already there to use. But again, I think because it isn't super specific to that particular research question or that particular participant and that particular piece builder in their context, it might not be the most useful thing.
Then there's another question just came in from Erica about evaluation. So related to that question, the kind of black box model rather than lexicon labeling that the machine will be applying to speech based on a simplified hate speech, not hate speech classifier. How will you monitor for ethical problems, so we know that discrimination and our own personal biases can come into these? How are you going to monitor that?
I think that's simplifying what we're actually doing, oversimplifying what we're doing, because a lexicon labeling by humans is just a rules-based model. You're still telling the machine to do what you ask it to do. This is not so different. It's just machine enhanced, basically. But we still have a human labeling thousands of pieces of information and feeding that to a machine. So I struggle a little bit with that. There is subjectivity in the creation of a lexicon, and there is subjectivity in the creation of a mathematical model. And both of those are subject to discrimination. I think what we will be transparent about is what the process was for arriving at this classifier, and how accurate we think it is. And that will be our monitoring for the ethics behind it. But I'm just not sure, and also, sorry, the other thing I want to say is I'm not sure that it will just, I was simplifying when I was saying hate speech, not hate speech. What's more likely is that each row will be annotated with a number of different things. So, for example, hate speech related to X, hate speech related to Y, etc. So that the classification would be more complex than just hate speech, not hate speech. So I think, I don't know. Yeah.
Again, I think maybe the hate speech, you could see it as it's just another label that particular piece building or group of piece builders want to be inferred on their data. So we're not going to be using that model outside of their particular research context, or no one else is going to be really using their model. Really, it's that particular piece building entity's tool to give some label to a whole set of data. And it could be hate speech, or it could be it's about a particular politician, or it's about a particular event, or it's about a particular area of the country.
This is where I think it's really important to point out your model of using participatory action research. So you are making sure that the people making those labels are representative in terms of the diverse gender, age, religious, political points of view. I'm assuming, that's correct?
Not only that, but they're all peace builders, right? So, and they are working towards this particular problem statement. So I think, you know, the kind of ethical dilemmas that we get into is when we're trying to make standardized models across a very large population based on inputs from a very small and you know, usually privileged set of labelers. I think that's the issue, or a set of data also, right? So,
I guess to be clear, I've never labeled anything as hate speech or not, and I don't intend to. So if that might answer something.
It's really a shared problem in the field of peace building. When we do conflict analysis in general, we always need to be sure who is doing the analysis and whether they are representing diverse points of view and experiences. So that's just bringing that challenge to this tool. Other questions have just come in. Let's see, can any of you? Okay, so the last one, if I am not mistaken, you spoke about choosing a subset of the larger data set for manual categorization that then informs the algorithm. Do you have a standard system to determine how large the subset? A specific proportion of the bigger data set that you're using? So you said 2%, I know in your slides.
Okay, so there's a few bits where we're taking only a subset of data. So there's the entirety of the social network, which we're taking a tiny portion of that, and where the data that we crawl is based on the configuration or the specification from the peace builders. So they say, we're trying to understand this particular, we want to answer this research question, and we want to crawl these accounts and related accounts. So they're, in a sense, picking the subset of the network that they want to analyze. That's kind of part one. And then part two is, then once we've crawled posts and tweets, when it comes to the manual labeling part, we're sending them an initial subset for them to label. And again, we pick that subset, not again, but this time we pick that subset by just, it's a random fair chance selection from all of the data. And then as we do the next iterations, we start doing stuff where we will try to give them examples that the machine learning model is kind of unsure about. So where the model is already undecided, because they will hopefully give the most information back to the model once it's labeled by those peace builders. Does that answer that question?
Yes, excellent. I don't see any more questions. Did anyone not have their question answered? You're welcome to just turn your video on and ask it if you are still here in the last minute. If not, let me just say thank you very much. This was absolutely fantastic. And I hope many of our participants today, or the audience who will watch this afterwards, because again, it's being recorded, will contact you. So thank you very, very much. Again, this is the Alliance for Peacebuilding, Digital Peacebuilding Community of Practice.